Beyond the smiles, sermons, and championship belts lies a much darker truth. At 75, George Foreman passed away with the world remembering him as a preacher, a grill salesman, and one of boxing's greatest legends. But behind the glory was a haunting secret, one he never fully explained, one that may have followed him to the grave. The rise of George Foreman. George Foreman came up the hard way. He was born in the rough Houston, Texas neighborhoods of the 1950s. Life was tough, his family didn't have a lot of money, and George was constantly getting into trouble. By the time he was a teenager, he was spending time on the streets, fighting, committing truancy, and petty crimes. He subsequently confessed that he was always angry and could not find a means of escape from his circumstances. But all of that began to shift when he entered the Job Corps, a program that provided job training and education to troubled youth. Foreman entered it not because he was eager to learn, he was more interested in the $60 per month stipend and an opportunity to leave his surroundings. But this choice proved to be transformative. While in the Job Corps, he met Doc Broadus, a boxing trainer who noticed something in George that no one else did. Broadus recognized that George was tough, combative, and possessed power naturally. But more than that, he gave George something he never had before: structure and control. Broadus urged him to train intensely in boxing, and George took it seriously. He always enjoyed fighting, but now it had meaning. Foreman trained diligently and soon began winning amateur bouts. He was a formidable presence due to his size, strength, and power in punching. Within a matter of years, he became one of the nation's top young fighters and moved from street kid to becoming one of the greatest young fighters in the country. His dedication bore fruit big time when he qualified for the 1968 U.S. Olympic boxing team. That year, the Summer Olympics were held in Mexico City, and George entered the ring as a relative unknown. But when the dust settled, he had stunned the world by winning the gold medal in heavyweight boxing. He defeated Soviet boxer Ionis Chepulis in the final and raised his fists in triumph. What made the moment even more legendary was when George pulled out a tiny American flag and waved it high in the ring. It was an image of strength during a period when the U.S. was experiencing a lot of racial and political unrest. The gold medal did more than just make George famous. It made him confident. For the first time in his life, he felt he had a future. From being a problem child on the streets of Houston to an Olympic champion in front of the whole world, he had achieved what many thought was impossible. This victory was merely a warm-up. Trainers and promoters eagerly began signing him to their contracts soon afterwards. Only a year went by when George Foreman went professional, and his career journey towards heavyweight stardom officially commenced. But beneath the glory and increasing renown, George still bore the scars of his hardscrabble start. Those gritty beginnings in Houston shaped him, both as a fighter and a human being. It gave him toughness. It gave him something to prove, not only to the world, but to himself. And little did anyone realize, the true story of George Foreman was only now getting started. The ruthless destroyer in the ring. Following Olympic gold, George Foreman entered professional boxing like a man with a mission. From the start, it was apparent, this was no ordinary fighter. George was huge, strong, and formidable. And he wasn't merely winning battles, he was annihilating his foes. Foreman began his professional career in 1969, and for several years afterwards, no one could catch him. He piled up victory after victory, knocking out most of the fighters who got in his way. His punches were sledgehammers. His fights didn't even last long because his opponents couldn't take his power. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't prance around the ring like Muhammad Ali. George was raw power and aggression. By the time he faced Joe Frazier in 1973, Foreman had an unbeaten record and was already notorious for his frightening knockout power. But the people still regarded Frazier as the favorite. After all, Frazier was the heavyweight champion and had defeated Muhammad Ali. But what transpired in that bout stunned the world. In only 2 rounds, George Foreman completely dominated Frazier. He knocked him to the canvas 6 times before the fight was stopped. That evening, Foreman became the world heavyweight champion, and his fame erupted. Commentators were amazed at how effortlessly he performed. Frazier had never been treated like this before. The words "down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier" became perhaps the most iconic phrase in the history of boxing, bellowed by sportscaster Howard Cosell in that fight. Foreman's win was not simply a victory, it was a message. He was now boxing's most feared man. People began referring to George as a monster in the ring. He wasn't mean or dirty, but his violent approach made it seem like he was trying to hurt people. And to be honest, at the time, George sort of did. He said later that he had a lot of anger and wanted to knock people out quickly, before they could hit him. His bouts would usually end with early knockouts, and fans wanted to witness how soon he could destroy his next victim. But this is what made George all the more interesting. Outside the ring, he was reserved, quiet, and serious. He wasn't boisterous or cocky like some of the other fighters. He didn't showboat. Many of the reporters said it was difficult to read him. He didn't smile, and he seldom did long interviews. Some of them thought he was arrogant, but actually, George was simply intense and focused. This dichotomy between his brutal strength in the ring and his peaceful nature outside made him appear even more intimidating. Others did not know what to make of him. Foes were frequently intimidated before the bell even ringing, just by seeing him glare at them. In those days, Foreman seemed unbeatable. With each bout, his legend increased. People thought he was going to remain undefeated forever. But nobody remains at the top forever, and for George Foreman, a dramatic turn of events was just ahead. By 1974, George Foreman was the king of the world. He was the undefeated heavyweight champion, famous for knocking out anyone who stood in his way. Fans believed that he was invincible. All of that was about to change in one of the most historic fights in boxing history, the Rumble in the Jungle. The battle was in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the rival was Muhammad Ali himself. Ali didn't have a chance, many thought at the time. Foreman was younger, bigger, and had just defeated Joe Frazier, someone Ali had struggled to defeat. But Ali had a secret strategy, and it would stun the world. Rather than escaping Foreman's punches, Ali leaned on the ropes and let George exhaust himself, throwing everything he had. It was called the rope-a-dope. Foreman threw and threw, but Ali continued to block, dodge, and taunt him. Round after round, George wore himself out attempting to knock Ali out. By round 8, Foreman was a spent force. That's when Ali counterattacked. He landed a solid combination, and Foreman hit the canvas. It was his first loss in his professional career. This loss was not just a defeat. It hit George hard mentally and emotionally. He had constructed his entire persona on being invincible. So when Ali knocked him out, it not only hurt his record, it shattered his confidence. Following the fight, George began to struggle. He felt that people had turned against him. He later explained that he felt betrayed by some of the individuals in his corner. He became paranoid and did not know whom to trust. The man who entered the ring like a destroyer in the past now felt confused and alone. His career continued, but something was different. The fear he used to inspire was gone. And deep down, George felt lost. That one loss to Ali started a chain reaction, not just in his boxing career, but in his personal life. The unbeatable champion was no longer invincible, and for the first time, he had to face his own doubts and fears. The mysterious disappearance and spiritual awakening. Following his embarrassing defeat to Muhammad Ali in 1974, George Foreman was never the same in the ring. He continued to fight for a few more years, but his heart was no longer in it like it used to be. Then in 1977, something occurred that altered his life and resulted in one of the greatest sports transformations in history. That year, following a battle with Jimmy Young in Puerto Rico, George experienced a harrowing near-death experience. He not only lost the bout, but he also fainted in the locker room after it. Foreman reported that his body was ice cold, and he believed he was going to die. But what startled him most wasn't the physical anguish. It was what he experienced within. George explained that he felt as if his soul was being drained away into darkness. At that instant, he bawled and begged God with everything he was made of. "I don't care if it is dying, I still have faith in you." He likened experiencing this robust presence and, in an instant, a profound peacefulness unlike he'd ever experienced. It felt like being brought back out from within the void to get one's life on purpose again. At that, a start at becoming awakened happened within him spiritually. Soon after, George retired from boxing at just 28 years old. He completely walked away from fame, money, and the spotlight. For the next 10 years, he stayed out of the ring and turned his life in a completely new direction. He became a born-again Christian, started studying the Bible deeply, and eventually became an ordained preacher. People who had once feared him now listened to him deliver sermons. Foreman established a youth center in Houston and started preaching to anyone who would listen, particularly rebellious teens. He preached that true strength wasn't from your fists, it was from your heart and your faith. But here's the part that most don't know. George has suggested that there was more to his spiritual experience than he's ever fully disclosed. He's told interviewers that what he saw and felt in that fatal moment was so intense and intimate, he doesn't discuss it all. He's kept some of that encounter to himself, describing it as too deep to describe. For George Foreman, that religious experience wasn't necessarily about becoming religious. It was about beginning anew as an entirely new man. And for the next 10 years, he led a quiet existence that no one could have anticipated from the once named most feared fighter in the world. From preacher to puncher again. After a decade as a preacher and community leader, George Foreman shocked the world again with a comeback to boxing in the late 1980s. Most people didn't believe him. He was older, heavier, and no longer the frightening young upstart who had punched out Joe Frazier. The media ridiculed. Writers joked about his weight and dismissed the comeback as a joke, but George didn't care. He wasn't trying to show anyone anything. He was trying to raise money for his youth center. He said God had given him a second chance, and now he was going to use boxing to help him keep the dream alive. And even though he didn't look like a normal boxer anymore, he still possessed one thing that counted: power. That knockout power had never deserted him. In 1994, Foreman fought Michael Moorer, the then heavyweight champion. Moorer was 26 years old, a full 20 years younger than George. Everybody expected it to be a mismatch. But Foreman was prepared. He kept his cool, waited for his opportunity, and in round 10, delivered a massive right hand that knocked Moorer out cold. George Foreman was the oldest heavyweight boxing champion at 45 years of age. It was one of the most astounding comebacks ever. Since then, George's image changed entirely. The intimidating, serious boxer of the 70s was now smiling, joking, and making appearances on chat shows. He was a favorite among fans. His deep laughter, optimistic outlook, and foodie nature made him more human. Then there was the George Foreman Grill, which made him a name in every household. He sold millions of them and became very rich, far more than he ever did from boxing. But even at this happy, friendly stage of his life, there were depths to George that people didn't always notice. Behind the smile and affable TV appearances was a man who had endured profound struggles. His fatal experience, spiritual warfare, and years of introspection had transformed him, but they also left emotional scars. He was proud of his change, but he had a lot of pain about his past, lost time with loved ones, and the years he wasted in doubt and anger. Even while the world rejoiced at his return, there were things George kept to himself, the secret he hid from the world. In the course of his lifetime, George Foreman introduced us to a lot of aspects: tough boxer, pious preacher, comedian, TV personality, and entrepreneur. However, there was always something mysteriously different about him, particularly that when he would talk about his history, George occasionally suggested that he was concealing a terrible, agonizing secret. He never actually did, but whatever he said kept one guessing. What was it that he wasn't telling? Years went by, and fans and journalists caught hints. George constantly spoke of being ashamed of the man he once was, not only in the ring, but before ever being famous. He grew up in the hard Fifth Ward of Houston, living the hard life. He was getting into street brawls and even admitted that he used to steal from people before entering the Job Corps. He commonly referred to his early life as mean and angry. But what transpired during those years? Others have speculated that it was something about a violent episode that still haunted him. Maybe one of those fights got out of hand. Maybe someone was seriously injured or worse, and George never spoke of it in the press. His quick turn toward spirituality in 1977, shortly after his brush with lifelessness, appeared to arrive with a crushing weight of guilt. Was that guilt attached to something he never confessed? Others speculated the secret was more intimate, such as a family tragedy or a betrayal from someone close to him. George has talked about times in his life when he felt utterly alone, like he couldn't trust a soul. He once made the comment that he felt used by those around him after his loss to Muhammad Ali. Had someone betrayed him in some way that altered his perception of the world? Or perhaps the truth was even more profound. Perhaps George was tormented by what he had become and the violence he used to glorify. His eyes tended to reveal a tale that his words could not. Perhaps becoming a preacher, giving back to society, and becoming a public figure of peace were all attempts to atone for a past error he could never fully forgive himself for. Whatever the secret was, George Foreman committed to it. He transformed his life entirely, turned to God, and attempted to become the man he wished he'd always been. But behind it all, that success and redemption, it's obvious. Something from his past still had a presence lurking in the background, something he never wanted the world to know. Dark family ties and personal regrets. Outside the ring, George Foreman was a family man. But even that aspect of his life had complicated emotions, personal regret, and aching moments many never anticipated. He had 12 children, 5 sons, and 7 daughters, and did his best to be there for all of them. But it wasn't always simple, and his decisions led people to speculate about what truly went on behind closed doors. One of the most widely discussed things that George ever did was to give all 5 of his sons the name George. To a man, they were all named George. From George Jr. to George VI, they all shared the name. Some people thought it was funny, others that it was odd. George explained that he did it because he wanted all of them to share something strong. He used to joke that if one of them got into trouble, he wouldn't have to remember names. But others have speculated that this decision was about control or legacy, perhaps even a means of maintaining a sense of power over his family. As his kids grew older, not all of them had an easy road. One of his sons, George Foreman IV, also called Big Wheel, attempted to follow in his dad's footsteps as a boxer and then as a reality TV celebrity. But it was evident that dwelling in their dad's shadow wasn't simple. Throughout the years, some of his kids wrestled with the stress that stemmed from having a larger-than-life father. Then came one of the saddest moments of George's life. In 2019, his daughter, Frida Foreman, who was also a former professional boxer herself, took her own life at age 42. George was devastated. He had always supported Frida to follow her dreams, but her life was full of highs and lows, and she was beset with mental health issues. Her passing affected him greatly. He put up a post stating that he needed just one more day with her. You could sense the hurt in his words. Others have speculated that the terrible secret George had to carry somehow related to his family, whether guilt for being a lousy father during his early years, or remorse for words not said or actions not taken. Having such a large family and such a life full of ups and downs, it's easy to imagine George wrestling with the thought that he didn't do enough. The tragic death of Frida Foreman. Frida Foreman was one of the 7 daughters of George Foreman, and also, like her father, Frida entered the boxing ring. But in contrast to George, her journey was shorter and marked by unobtrusive pain. Frida's narrative is one of strength, pressure, and a tragic demise that greatly touched her father. In the early 2000s, Frida took the courageous step of becoming a professional boxer. She had talent and strength, just like her father. But her decision concerned George. Although boxing had made him famous, he did not want his daughter injured in the same violent sport. He was vocally opposed to her boxing career, even going so far as to offer to pay her to quit. For George, it wasn't ego, it was fear. He was aware of how perilous the ring was. Frida had a brief career. She boxed 6 times, winning 5 bouts, and retired in 2001. She retired from boxing and devoted her time to family, working in various capacities such as boxing promotion and even attempting some writing. Offstage, though, Frida was struggling with mental illness. With time, those internal conflicts became increasingly difficult to control. It was announced in March 2019 that Frida had taken her own life by suicide at age 42 at home in the Houston area. The reason was found to be asphyxia by hanging. The news broke George. He took to social media to post a heart-wrenching tribute, writing, "First Sunday in 42 years without my Frida. She's with her maker now." One could sense the sorrow in each sentence. Most who knew the family spoke about Frida as being bright, witty, and tough, but also consumed by the burden of her high-profile surname. Some speculated that she had felt compelled to meet standards she never requested. There were even speculations that she had been struggling with more internal issues than anyone outside her circle could have imagined, including personal relationship problems and emotional distress that perhaps never were ever properly handled. Allegations, abuse, and accusations. In 2022, a ghost from George Foreman's past returned in a manner that astonished many. Two women surfaced with serious accusations, alleging Foreman sexually abused them during the 1970s when they were teens. Both women indicated they were underage, and their fathers were close friends or acquaintances of Foreman at his boxing peak. These allegations were harsh. George had been a longtime preacher, a smiling face on television, and a man who frequently preached about redemption and faith. So, when the lawsuits were brought in California, people were shocked. The women alleged Foreman had used his fame and influence to manipulate and assault them. One of them alleged the abuse started when she was only 13 years old. Foreman instantly and firmly rejected the allegations, stating that the accusations were untrue and a money extortion ploy. In a statement, he stated, "I adamantly and categorically deny these allegations. The pride I take in my reputation means as much to me as my sports accomplishments." His lawyers responded by labeling the suits as unfounded. But regardless of what the court ruled, the allegations were sufficient to taint his image. For countless fans, it raised some tough questions. Could this be the awful secret that he had kept hidden for so many years? Was it possible that, despite rebuilding himself as a man of faith, he had something sinister lurking in his past that he never really spoke about publicly? Foreman's public position was always one of denial. He never acknowledged any wrongdoing. But others have speculated about how the lawsuit affected him emotionally, particularly in his later life. Did he harbor guilt about the charges themselves, or about how he acted as a young phenomenon under the glare of fame, power, and temptation? The truth of what happened is unknown, but these rumors from the past put another twist on the George Foreman story. They reminded everyone that even legends can have shadows, things they never wanted to come out. Whether or not the accusations were accurate, this moment compelled others to see George Foreman as more than just a champion, but as a complex individual. And it caused many to ask, maybe this is the secret he took to his grave. Can good deeds erase a terrible past? George Foreman's life was one of second chances. He transitioned from a menacing boxer in the ring to a warm face on TV, peddling grills and talking about faith. He dedicated his life to God, became a minister, and touched millions with his redemptive story. But that raises a difficult question. Can good works wash away a person's past? Foreman was honest about his errors, at least those with which he felt comfortable. He acknowledged he was angry, selfish, and prideful in his early years. He recounted anecdotes about his fatal experience in 1977, when he thought God offered him a second chance at life. That moment converted him from a fighter into a preacher. He even proclaimed, "God save me, not just from death, but from myself." He used the next decade serving other people. He established youth centers, helped families, and taught words of love and forgiveness. Yet some would ask, what if there were something that he never spoke of? Could a man who had so transformed continue to harbor deep shame? Could he die with a weighty secret? That's the tough part about redemption. To the public, George appeared to be happy and at peace. But only he was aware of what tormented him when the cameras stopped rolling. Whether it was family regrets, past transgressions, or serious charges, there is a distinction between public forgiveness and private guilt. Religion says anyone can be forgiven regardless of how evil their history may be. Forgiveness does not always undo the damage or eliminate the pain it leaves behind. For someone who preached about healing and religion, such as Foreman, perhaps the toughest fight wasn't in the ring, but in his mind. Could he forgive himself? Ultimately, the world will know George Foreman as a two-time heavyweight champion, a minister, and an entrepreneur. But perhaps they will never truly understand what he bore in secret, certain things he took to his grave. Nevertheless, perhaps that is the nature of being human. We all have errors, and occasionally, the path to redemption is not clean. For George Foreman, his positive acts were heard loud and clear. But the question is still there. Can a life filled with second chances erase an awful secret, or does it merely allow a man to live with it?